File 25. The storm shelter signal. The live stream started before the sky turned green. I was outside the county storm shelter with a shoulder cam, feeding live to the station, while the wind kept changing directions, like it couldn't decide where the tornado wanted to land. The building behind me was a squat concrete box, half buried into the hill, painted with chipped yellow arrows and an old FEMA-style sign that looked older than I was. I remember joking into the mic that this was the safest place in the county to wait out the storm. The comments section was moving fast, people asking where touchdown had been confirmed, whether the sirens were county-wide, whether we'd stay live if the power dropped. Then, during a pause between gusts, I heard someone whisper right under my question. Not in my earpiece. Not from the street. Inside the wall behind my shoulder. I stopped talking and turned the camera toward the shelter door, thinking maybe someone had come up behind me, or one of the county volunteers was trying to get my attention. Nobody was there. The wind screamed across the parking lot hard enough to rattle the chain link fence, but underneath it I heard the same voice again, soft and dry, like it had to scrape across dust to reach me. I tested it. I said, "Can anyone hear me?" And half a second later, from somewhere inside the concrete, a whisper answered, "Hear me." Same rhythm as my voice, same spacing, not an echo. It was too low, too human, too deliberate. The live stream chat exploded. People were clipping it live. One person typed that it sounded like someone answering from inside the walls, and that was exactly what it sounded like. By the time the first rain hit, County Emergency Management had already unlocked the shelter and started waving people in. I followed them inside with the camera still rolling, ducking through the steel door into a narrow stairwell that dropped below ground. The air changed immediately. Outside smelled like wet asphalt and electricity. Inside smelled like old concrete, metal shelves, stale blankets, and the kind of trapped cold that never leaves underground rooms. A few families were already down there, pressed along the benches with weather radios and phone flashlights. I kept the lens off their faces and moved toward the back wall where the whisper had seemed strongest on the feed. I asked quietly this time, "Is there another room back here?" The answer came back from the concrete seam beside the emergency light. "Back here." Not loud, not distorted, just close. I told the anchor in my earpiece what was happening, and at first she thought the station was getting bleed from the weather scanner, or my mic was bouncing off the stairwell. Then she said the control room could hear it too, but only when I spoke. If I stayed silent, the shelter audio sounded normal. If I asked a question, the wall answered. That was when I stopped thinking equipment glitch and started walking the shelter perimeter with the lens inches from the concrete. There were hairline cracks running through the painted surface, old patched sections, spots where water had bled rusty streaks downward over the years. Nothing moved. Nothing should have been able to move. But when I asked, "Who's down here with us?" the whisper came from a vent near the floor and said, "With us." One of the people on the bench started crying before I even lowered the camera. The county worker insisted there had never been a second level. No crawl space either. Just storage, benches, and reinforced walls poured decades ago. He kept saying that like he was trying to convince himself. I panned over the shelter map bolted near the supply cabinet, and he was right. One rectangle, one stairwell, no hidden rooms. But the live audio track started getting worse the longer we stayed underground. It wasn't just repeating me anymore. It started answering questions before I finished asking them. I said, "How many people are..." And the whisper cut in with, "Not enough." I asked, "What is this place?" And it breathed, "Not for storms." The anchor went dead silent in my ear for 3 full seconds. When she came back, her voice had changed. She told me not to leave the wall. She said engineering had isolated a second voice print on the stream, and it matched mine. I remember exactly where I was standing when that stopped feeling like a creepy broadcast problem and started feeling personal. There was a stack of folded cots against the far wall, a red emergency box, and a long vertical crack where 2 slabs met. The moment I stepped in front of that seam, the whisper moved from the wall to directly behind my left ear. I spun so fast the image blurred. Nothing there. Just concrete and shadows. I put my free hand against the wall and felt vibration under my palm. Faint, but steady. Like a voice passing through pipes from very far away. Then the whisper used my name. Not the name on-air viewers knew. My real first name, the one nobody at the station used on broadcasts. It said it softly, almost kindly, and then asked, "Why did you come back?" The control room dumped the live comments off my return feed, but it was too late. I had already seen enough of them to know viewers were hearing more than we were. Some said the whisper track was coming through in stereo, circling under my voice. Some said if they wore headphones, they could hear breathing between my sentences. One viewer claimed the wall voice wasn't repeating me at all, just choosing the part of my question it wanted to answer. So I tested that too. I asked, "Did someone die in here?" The whisper ignored the first half and replied, "Still here." I asked, "How many?" It said, "You tell me." When I swung the camera over the room again, the shelter occupants looked wrong. Not disfigured, not bloody, just too still, too quiet, like they were listening for their own names in the walls. Then the sirens outside cut off at once. Not faded, stopped. Everybody in the room felt it. You could hear the shelter change shape in the silence. The building settled. A bottle rolled under a bench. Somewhere above us, loose debris dragged across the roof in a long, scraping line. I pointed the camera toward the stairwell, expecting to hear the storm moving overhead. But there was nothing except a distant thud that sounded less like weather and more like someone dropping their full body weight onto the hatch from the outside. The whisper came again, clearer than before, and for the first time it didn't wait for me to speak first. It said, "Don't let them open it." I asked who. The wall answered, "The ones who came in last time." Then every weather radio in the room burst with static at the same exact second. One of the county workers tried the radio by the supply shelf and got nothing but hiss. Another climbed halfway up the stairs and shouted that somebody was pounding on the outer door. You could hear it then. 3 slow hits, pause, then 3 more. Too even to be panic. Too patient to be storm survivors. The people on the benches started begging him not to unlatch it, some because of the tornado, some because they had heard the same whisper I had and no longer trusted anything outside. I zoomed on the steel door at the top of the stairwell, and the pounding stopped the second the red recording light centered on it. Then a voice from beyond the hatch called down, muffled by metal and rain. It was my voice, calm, professional, the exact tone I use on air. It said, "We're live when you come out." I don't know who moved first, me or the wall. One second I was backing away from the stairs, keeping the camera trained upward, and the next there was a sharp crack behind me like concrete splitting under pressure. Everyone screamed. I whipped around and caught it for maybe 2 seconds before the picture smeared. The long seam in the rear wall had opened just enough to show darkness behind it, not insulation or dirt, but a narrow space with depth where no space should have existed. The whisper wasn't coming through the wall. It was coming from inside that slit. My own voice spilled out of it in layers, dozens of overlapping takes of me from different broadcasts, different tones, different years, all speaking at once. Underneath them, lower and slower, another voice asked, "Do you remember the first shelter?" I did not answer. I didn't need to. Something inside the gap laughed like it already knew. The last clean part of the recording is the worst, because nothing jumps at the lens and nothing obvious attacks anyone. It's just the room deciding which way reality goes. The people nearest the back wall started turning toward the opening one by one, not like they were being pulled, but like they recognized something calling them from home. The steel hatch upstairs began to shudder in its frame as the version of my voice outside kept asking to be let in. The whisper in the wall kept asking why I had come back, and that word back did something to me I still can't explain. Because for 1 second I knew with total certainty that I had stood in that shelter before, years ago, during another storm, with another camera, and that nobody at the station had any footage from that night because nobody had ever made it back with the tape. The final image freezes on the wall, opening, widening by an inch, and inside it, dozens of tiny reflections of my face blinking at different times. If this file got under your skin, that means it worked. Drop a comment with the moment that hit hardest, and subscribe before the next tape surfaces. More POV horror files are coming, and some shelters are built to keep the storm out, while others are built to keep something in.